The air inside the grand ballroom was thick, heavy with the scent of expensive perfume and the faint, chemical smell of champagne that had been sitting out for too long. It was the kind of place where the walls were painted a deep, shiny gold, and the floor was so polished you could see your own reflection staring back at you, usually looking a little tired and worried. For Lisa, who was currently holding a silver tray loaded with glasses full of bubbling yellow liquid, the floor was the enemy. She had to walk carefully, placing one foot in front of the other with a balance she didn't feel in her heart, terrified of slipping and making a mess that would cost her more than a month's rent. This was the annual charity gala for the city's richest people. They called it a charity event, but it looked more like a contest to see who could wear the most jewelry and drink the most wine without falling over. Lisa adjusted the strap of her black vest. It was tight around her shoulders, digging in a little bit. She had been working as a server for 3 months now, ever since the music school closed down and the bills started piling up faster than autumn leaves in a backyard. She tried not to think about the music. Thinking about it made her chest hurt, a sharp, hollow ache that felt like hunger but didn't go away when she ate. She moved through the crowd like a ghost, which is exactly what the guests wanted her to be. She was there to take empty glasses and bring full ones, to disappear into the background, a machine in a human suit. No one looked her in the eye. They would reach out, their hands heavy with diamond rings and gold watches, pluck a drink from her tray, and turn immediately back to their conversations about stocks, vacations, and renovations. Lisa kept her head down, her eyes focused on the middle distance, counting the seconds until her break. The centerpiece of the entire evening, the thing everyone was actually here to see before the bidding started, sat on a raised platform at the far end of the room. It was a concert grand piano, black as a midnight sky and gleaming under the spotlight. It was a masterpiece of wood and wire, worth more money than Lisa would probably see in 10 years of working double shifts. A red velvet rope was strung up around it, with a small sign that said "Please do not touch." Lisa had avoided looking at it all night. But as the crowd thinned out near the main stage, waiting for the speeches to begin, she found herself standing closer to it. She paused to let a man in a tuxedo walk past, nearly spilling his drink in the process. She let out a small breath she didn't know she was holding. The room was buzzing with low murmurs, the sound of 100 separate conversations blending together into a dull roar. She looked up. The piano was right there. From where she stood, she could see the pristine white keys. They looked like teeth in a perfect smile. It wasn't just an instrument to her, it was a memory. She remembered the feel of keys under her fingers, the way the vibrations would travel up her arms and settle in her chest when she played a chord just right. She remembered the dusty smell of the practice rooms at school and the feeling of being complete, of being exactly who she was supposed to be. That life felt like a dream she had woken up from a long time ago. She shifted the tray to her left hand. Her right hand felt empty, twitching slightly at her side. She wanted to touch the smooth finish of the piano. She wanted to feel the connection, just for a second, to remind herself that she was more than just a girl carrying a tray. It was a silly, dangerous thought. She knew better. If she crossed that velvet rope, even just to brush her fingers against the glossy wood, she would be thrown out. She needed this job. She needed the money to pay for her grandmother's medicine and the electricity bill. But the pull was strong. The room was loud, but the space around the piano was quiet, like the eye of a storm. She took a small step closer. The velvet rope was only a few feet away. She glanced around. The security guards were near the main entrance, watching the front doors, looking bored. The guests were busy laughing at a joke a tall man in a gray suit was telling. Lisa took another step. Her heart beat a little faster, thumping against her ribs like a trapped bird. She told herself she was just admiring it. That was allowed, right? You could look at art without getting in trouble. But looking wasn't enough. Her fingers ached with the memory of playing. She missed the music the way a person misses water in a desert. She felt a sudden, desperate urge to press down on a key, just one, to hear a single note cut through the stuffy, fake air. She leaned in, balancing the tray carefully on her hip. She reached out her right hand, her fingers trembling just a little. She wasn't going to play a song. She wasn't going to make a scene. She just wanted to feel the coolness of the ivory keys, to know that the beauty she remembered still existed in the world, even if she wasn't allowed to be a part of it anymore. Her hand hovered over the rope. She looked at the piano legs, sturdy and elegant. She looked at the reflection of the chandelier in the black lacquer. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. It was everything she couldn't have. "What are you doing?" The voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp. It cut through the buzz of the room like a knife through silk. Lisa jumped, her hand snapping back to her side as if she had touched a hot stove. She nearly tipped the tray, grabbing it with both hands just in time to stop a glass from sliding off. She spun around. Standing a few feet away was a man she recognized from the news. He was one of the biggest donors, a tech billionaire who had bought the building the charity event was being held in. He was holding a glass of dark whiskey, and he wasn't smiling. He was looking at her with a mix of curiosity and disgust, like he had found a rat in his kitchen. I was just looking," Lisa stammered. Her voice sounded small and weak in the large room. She felt her face get hot, a flush of embarrassment rising up her neck. The man took a sip of his drink, his eyes narrowing as he looked her up and down, taking in the cheap black uniform, the scuffed shoes, and the heavy tray. He didn't see a person. He saw a problem. He stepped closer, invading her personal space, and glanced past her at the piano. "It's not for looking," he said, his voice low and sneering. "And certainly not for the likes of you. Don't touch what you can't afford." A few people nearby stopped talking. They turned to look, drawn by the sudden conflict. Lisa felt their eyes on her, dozens of hidden cameras flashing in her mind, capturing her shame. She gripped the tray so hard her knuckles turned white. She wanted to run. She wanted to disappear through the floor. But she was frozen, rooted to the spot by the man's gaze. "I wasn't going to hurt it," she whispered, though she knew it was useless. To him, she was just dirt that might dirty his prize. "Just keep serving," he said, waving a hand dismissively, as if he were shooing away a fly. "Leave the art to the people who paid for it." He turned his back on her, joining a group of women in sparkling gowns who laughed politely at his arrival. Lisa stood there for a moment, alone in the crowd. The silence in her own head was deafening. She looked at the piano one last time, then turned away, lowering her head, and went back to work, carrying the heavy burden of the drinks and the heavier burden of her own invisibility. The room was loud again, but to her, it just sounded like noise. The minutes dragged on, each one feeling heavier than the last. Lisa moved through the sea of tuxedos and glittering dresses like a robot, her feet aching inside her flat, sensible shoes. The tray she carried felt as if it were made of lead, not silver. She stopped at a small table near the back wall to collect the empty champagne flutes that had been abandoned. As she reached for a glass that was tipping over, a drop of the golden liquid spilled onto the pristine white tablecloth. She panicked, grabbing a napkin to dab it quickly, her heart racing for no reason other than the fear of doing something wrong. All around her, the atmosphere felt fake. People were laughing, but their eyes often remained cold and watchful. They were networking, hunting for opportunities, sizing each other up like merchants in a marketplace. Lisa felt entirely out of place, a speck of dust in a diamond mine. She wiped the tablecloth clean, relieved that the stain was barely visible, and turned back to the crowd. Her eyes, against her better judgment, drifted back toward the front of the room. The piano sat there, bathed in the glow of the spotlight. It looked lonely, even though it was the most expensive object in the room. The red velvet rope around it seemed less like a barrier and more like a challenge now. The rude man's words still echoed in her ears, stinging sharp. Leave the art to the people who paid for it? She knew she should just stay away. She should go to the kitchen, get more ice, and keep her head down until her shift ended. But a strange feeling was bubbling up in her chest. It wasn't just anger, it was a deep, vibrating sadness. She remembered how it felt to sit on a bench, to feel the steady vibration of the strings humming through the wood and into her body. That connection was the only thing that had ever made her feel like she mattered. Without the music, she felt like a hollow shell, just a body taking up space. The guests were starting to migrate toward the far corner of the ballroom where a long buffet table had been set up. The smell of roasted lamb and expensive cheese drifted through the air, drawing the crowd away. The area near the stage was thinning out. The security guards were leaning against the pillars near the exit, looking at their phones or yawning. They weren't paying attention to the instrument. They assumed no one would be stupid enough to touch something worth that much money. Lisa took a deep breath. She told herself she was just going to walk past it. That was all. Just take the shortest route back to the service kitchen. But as she got closer, her steps slowed down. The shiny black surface of the piano reflected the chandeliers above, looking like a piece of the night sky that had fallen onto the stage. She stopped. She looked around. No one was watching. The people nearby were too busy arguing about politics or bragging about their latest vacations to notice a tired waitress standing still. Lisa set her tray down on a small, round cocktail table that was hidden behind a large decorative plant. Her hands felt free for the first time in hours. She flexed her fingers. They were stiff from gripping the heavy tray. She took a small step toward the velvet rope. It was low, barely coming up to her knees. It would be so easy to step over it. Just one step. Her heart was beating so hard she could hear the thumping in her ears. It was a dangerous impulse. If she got caught, she would lose her job instantly. She wouldn't be able to pay the rent. Her grandmother would have no one to help her. The logic screamed at her to turn around. But the pull of the piano was stronger than the fear. She stepped over the rope. The moment she was on the other side, the air felt different. It was quieter here, as if the piano created a bubble of silence around itself. She walked up to the side of the instrument. It was massive, looming over her like a gentle giant. Up close, she could smell the faint scent of wax and old wood, a smell that brought tears to her eyes. It smelled like her old school, like the practice room she used to hide in during lunch breaks. She stood in front of the keys. The lid was open, revealing the strings inside, tight and complex. The black and white keys stared back at her, waiting. They looked clean, untouched. A small sign sat on the music rack that said "Silent Auction Item 4. I'm not going to hurt you," she whispered to the piano, as if it could hear her. "I just want to say hello." She slowly raised her right hand. Her fingers trembled, not from cold, but from the sheer force of her emotions. She missed this. She missed it so much it felt like a physical weight on her shoulders. She just wanted to remember what it felt like. She wasn't going to play a song. She wasn't going to make a sound. She just wanted to feel the cool ivory under her fingertips. Her hand hovered over the keys. She closed her eyes for a second and imagined she was back in her jeans and t-shirt, sitting in a dusty room with no cares in the world. She let her fingers descend. She didn't press down hard enough to make a sound. She just rested her fingertips on the white keys. It was a gentle touch, a ghost of a caress. The plastic was cool and smooth. It felt electric. A jolt went through her arm, instantly waking up a part of her brain that had been asleep for years. For a split second, the noise of the party, the smells of the food, and the fear of the rude billionaire all vanished. There was only her and the music. She traced the line of the keys from the low end to the high end, her fingers dancing silently over the surface. It was a heartbreaking moment of connection. She was a musician touching a masterpiece, unable to speak. It was like meeting an old lover you can no longer be with, just brushing their hand as you walk past them on the street. A silent tear rolled down her cheek, hot and fast. She didn't wipe it away. She stood there, eyes closed, lost in the memory of a melody she used to play. In her head, she could hear the notes. She could hear the swelling crescendo, the soft trills, the deep bass notes that would vibrate the floor. She could feel the music flowing through her veins again. For the first time in a long time, she felt whole. She kept her hand there for maybe 10 seconds, maybe 20. It felt like a lifetime. She took a deep breath, savoring the moment, committing the feeling to memory so she could hold onto it during the long, hard shifts ahead. Then, the spell broke. Hey! A loud, booming voice shattered the silence. Lisa's eyes snapped open. She pulled her hand back as if she had been burned by a flame. She stumbled backward, her heel catching slightly on the thick carpet. The harsh reality of the ballroom rushed back in. The lights were too bright, the noise too loud. She wasn't a musician in this world, she was a servant who had crossed a line. She stood frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, looking toward the source of the voice, terrified of what she would see. Lisa spun around, her heart thumping so hard against her ribs that she thought it might bruise them. The blood drained from her face, leaving her feeling cold and dizzy. Standing just a few feet away, looking at her with a mixture of amusement and disgust, was the billionaire she had encountered earlier. He had a glass of dark whiskey in one hand and the other hand was tucked into the pocket of his expensive silk suit. He wasn't alone. 2 other men and a woman in a shimmering green dress stood with him, all of them laughing as if they had just heard the best joke of the night. "I told you," the billionaire said, his voice loud and cutting, slicing through the ambient music of the room. "I told you she looked like she was going to steal it. Or maybe break it? Who knows what goes on in the heads of the help?" The group laughed again. It wasn't a kind laugh, it was the laugh of people who knew they were powerful and that there would be no consequences for their cruelty. The woman in the green dress covered her mouth with a manicured hand, but her eyes danced with malice as she looked at Lisa's cheap black uniform. Lisa stood frozen, her feet feeling like they were glued to the expensive carpet. She wanted to run, to hide, to dissolve into the air, but she was trapped. She instinctively clasped her hands behind her back, hiding her right fingers, the ones that had dared to touch the forbidden keys. She felt a hot wave of shame wash over her, starting at her neck and rising up to her cheeks. She was sure she was bright red. I wasn't, Lisa stammered, her voice coming out as a squeak. She cleared her throat, trying to find some dignity, but it was impossible. She felt small. She felt like a child being scolded by a teacher. I was just looking. I didn't press anything. The billionaire took a slow sip of his drink, his eyes never leaving hers. He stepped closer, invading her space, forcing her to tilt her head back just to look at him. He smelled like expensive tobacco and leather. Just looking, he mocked, raising an eyebrow. You had your grubby little hands all over the keys. Do you have any idea how much this piano costs? Probably more than your entire apartment building. You probably have grease on your fingers. From serving the food. He looked at his friends for support. One of the men, a tall guy with a bald head, shook his head. It's a shame, really. They should screen the staff better. You can't just let anyone near these things. It's an antique. It's sensitive. Lisa felt a spark of anger deep in her chest, trying to fight through the shame. She wanted to scream that she washed her hands, that she knew how to treat an instrument, that she used to be better than all of them combined. But the words died in her throat. What was the point to them? She was invisible. She wasn't a person with a history or a talent. She was just a prop, a background character who had forgotten her lines. I'm sorry, Lisa whispered, dropping her gaze to the floor. I'll go now. You'll go now, the billionaire mimicked her voice, making it sound high-pitched and foolish. Yes, you'll go now. And you'll stay away from the things that don't belong to you. Stick to the trays. He gestured toward her abandoned tray on the side table with his glass. Go on. Pick it up. We have important people here who actually paid to be in this room. We don't need you contaminating the art. Lisa nodded quickly. She couldn't get out of there fast enough. She stepped backward, almost tripping over her own feet in her haste to retreat. She felt tears stinging the corners of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not in front of him. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction. She hurried to the side table, her hands trembling so badly she almost knocked over a stack of napkins. She grabbed the handle of the silver tray. It felt heavier than before, weighing her down like an anchor. She could feel the eyes of the group burning into her back. They were watching her, waiting to see if she would make another mistake, waiting to laugh again. As she turned to leave the stage area, the billionaire called out one last time. And be careful. Don't scratch the floor with those cheap shoes. The laughter erupted again, louder this time. A few people nearby turned to see what the commotion was, but most just ignored it, assuming it was just another drunk rich man having his fun. It was normal behavior here. Lisa was just the latest target. She walked away quickly, keeping her head down, her eyes fixed on the exit sign near the kitchen. She felt like she was walking through a tunnel, the sounds of the party muffling into a dull roar. She wanted to be invisible again. Being invisible was safe. Being seen was dangerous. She pushed through the swinging door that led to the service hallway and let out a breath she felt like she had been holding for hours. The noise of the party instantly cut off, replaced by the loud clatter of dishes and the shouting of chefs in the kitchen. It was chaotic, but it was real. Lisa leaned against the cold wall for a moment, closing her eyes. She took a deep, shaky breath. Her hands were still shaking. She looked down at her right hand, the one that had touched the piano. It looked perfectly normal. Clean. No grease. No damage. But she felt tainted. She felt like he had put a mark on her with his words. Hey, move it. We need glasses out there. A cook shouted, rushing past her with a huge pot of soup. Lisa pushed herself off the wall. Sorry, she mumbled, automatically. It was the word she said most in her life. Sorry for being here. Sorry for being poor. Sorry for wanting something beautiful. She walked over to the dishwasher station and dumped the dirty glasses from her tray into the plastic bin. The sound of glass clinking together was harsh and jarring. She grabbed a clean rag and wiped her hands aggressively, scrubbing them as if she could wash away the embarrassment, scrubbing away the memory of the man's sneering face. She thought about the piano. She thought about that moment of connection she had felt, that split second where she felt like herself again. It felt ruined now. The magic of the memory was stained by his cruelty. She would never be able to think about that moment without remembering his laugh. She grabbed a fresh tray and began loading it with fresh glasses of champagne. The machine never stopped, and neither could she. She had to go back out there. She had to face those people. She had to smile and serve them and pretend she didn't have a heart that could break. She took one more deep breath, forcing her face into a neutral mask. She picked up the heavy tray. Her arms felt weak, but she steadied them. She was good at pretending. She had done it for years. She pushed back through the swinging doors into the ballroom. The noise hit her like a wall. The lights were just as bright, the people just as loud. She kept her head down, scanning the room for empty glasses, avoiding the stage area entirely. She would stay on the other side of the room, far away from the piano and the man who owned it. But as she wove through the crowd, she noticed that the atmosphere near the front had changed. The laughter from the Billionaires group had died down. People were stopping their conversations. The buzzing hum of the room seemed to dip. Lisa paused near a pillar, curious despite herself. She looked over toward the stage. The billionaire was still there, but he wasn't laughing anymore. He was looking toward the entrance of the hall, a look of confusion on his face. Following his gaze, Lisa saw an older man walking into the room. He didn't look like the other guests. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo that screamed for attention. He wore a simple, dark suit that looked old but well taken care of. He had white hair and a cane, but he walked with a steady, rhythmic purpose. He didn't look at the food. He didn't look at the other guests. He was looking straight at the piano. And then, slowly, his eyes shifted, and he seemed to look right through the crowd, locking eyes with Lisa for a split second before turning back to the billionaire. The room felt like it was holding its breath. Something was about to happen. The stranger didn't walk with the hurried, nervous energy of the wait staff, nor did he have the arrogant swagger of the guests. He moved with a steady, quiet purpose, tapping his cane on the marble floor with a rhythmic click-clack sound that seemed to cut through the noise of the party. He was an older man, his hair a shock of white, neatly combed. His suit was simple, dark, and lacked the flashy cufflinks or silk handkerchiefs that the other men sported. He looked like he had stepped out of a different time, a time when dignity was worth more than money. Lisa pressed her back against the cold marble pillar, watching him. She felt a strange pull toward him, like he was the only real thing in a room full of plastic mannequins. She saw the billionaire, whose name she had learned was Julian from the hushed whispers of the guests, turn around. Julian's face went from a look of annoyance to a wide, fake smile in less than a second. It was the kind of smile a shark gives to a smaller fish. "Mr. Sterling." Julian boomed, spreading his arms wide. "I didn't expect to see you here tonight. It is an honor." The room seemed to react to the name. Heads turned. Conversations paused. Even the clinking of silverware seemed to soften. Lisa didn't know the name, but she could tell from the sudden shift in the air that this man was important. Not just rich guy important, but respected important. Mr. Sterling stopped a few feet away from the piano. He didn't offer his hand to Julian. Instead, he looked at the younger man with a calm, almost bored expression. The invitation said it was for the arts, Mr. Sterling said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried a gravelly weight that demanded attention. I assumed that meant there would be artists here. Not just bank accounts. Julian let out a short, nervous laugh. Well, we have the auction, of course. And the finest wine. I was just protecting the merchandise. The staff, you know, they have no boundaries. We just caught one of them trying to put her dirty hands all over the keys. Can you imagine the nerve? Julian pointed his thumb over his shoulder, gesturing vaguely in Lisa's direction. He didn't even look at her. She was just an object to him, a prop for his story to make himself look superior. Mr. Sterling didn't look at Julian. His eyes slowly drifted across the room, past the tuxedos and the gowns, until they landed on Lisa. She shrank back, trying to hide behind the pillar, but his gaze was piercing. He didn't look at her with disgust. He looked at her with curiosity. He saw her. She was touching it, Mr. Sterling asked, turning his gaze back to Julian. Touched it? Julian scoffed, taking a sip of his drink to hide his discomfort under the older man's stare. I caught her red-handed. No respect. She probably thinks she's some kind of artist, just because she works in a hotel. A silence fell over the immediate circle around them. It was an awkward silence. Julian's friends stopped laughing. They shifted on their feet, looking between the billionaire and the old man, sensing that the power dynamic had shifted. Mr. Sterling tapped his cane on the floor once. Thud. The sound was sharp. You claim to love music, Julian, Mr. Sterling said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerously soft. You buy these instruments. You donate to the halls. You put your name on the plagues. But do you actually listen? I listen to the best, Julian said, his voice tightening. He didn't like being questioned. I have season tickets to the symphony. That doesn't mean you listen, Mr. Sterling countered. He took a step closer to the piano, reaching out to rest his hand gently on the glossy black lid. This instrument is alive, Julian. It breathes. It speaks. It needs someone who understands its language. Exactly, Julian said, missing the point completely. That's why I paid a fortune for it. Only the best should play it. Mr. Sterling turned slowly away from the piano. He ignored Julian completely. He faced the room, his eyes searching again. He lifted his cane and pointed it toward the shadowy corner where Lisa was hiding. You, Mr. Sterling said. The word hung in the air. Girl. Come here. The room went dead silent. The band in the corner even stopped playing. Hundreds of eyes turned to look at the pillar. Lisa felt her legs turn to jelly. She couldn't move. If she walked out there, she would be humiliated again. Julian was staring at her with a look of pure hatred, as if she were a bug he wanted to squash. I have to work, Lisa whispered, but her voice was lost in the large room. Now, Mr. Sterling commanded. It wasn't a request. Lisa took a shaky breath. She looked at the exit, but she knew she couldn't run. There was a command in that old man's voice that was stronger than her fear. She pushed away from the pillar. She walked slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Every step felt like walking through deep water. She walked past the guests, who stared at her with a mix of pity and confusion. She walked past the security guards, who looked at each other, unsure of what to do. She walked until she was standing on the platform, right next to Julian and in front of Mr. Sterling. Up close, Mr. Sterling looked even older. His face was lined with deep wrinkles, like a map of a long journey. His eyes were pale blue but sharp, missing nothing. "What is your name?" he asked softly. "Lisa," she whispered. "Lisa," he repeated. "Julian here says you were contaminating the art. Is that true?" "No, sir," she said, her voice trembling slightly. I didn't press the keys. I just touched them. I love the piano. I didn't mean any harm." "She's a waitress, for God's sake," Julian interrupted, stepping forward. "Mr. Sterling, this is ridiculous. Let's get her back to the kitchen before she spills something on your suit." Mr. Sterling held up a hand, silencing Julian instantly. It was amazing to see. The man who owned the building shut up just because an old man lifted a finger. "You play, Lisa?" Mr. Sterling asked. She looked down at her shoes. "I used to. A long time ago." "Why did you stop?" "Life," she said simply. It was the truth. Life had gotten in the way. Bills, illness, survival. There was no room for music in a life spent trying not to drown. Mr. Sterling nodded slowly. He seemed to understand. He turned back to Julian. "You see, Julian. You look at the price tag. You look at the polish. She looks at the soul. That is why she belongs here, and you do not." "She doesn't belong," Julian snapped, his face turning red. "She has no idea what she's doing. She's probably never even seen a sheet of music." Mr. Sterling smiled then, a small, knowing smile. He turned to Lisa. He gestured toward the bench. "Sit." Lisa's eyes went wide. She looked at the piano, then at Mr. Sterling, then at the glaring face of Julian. "I can't," she said. "I haven't played in years. I'm rusty." "Rusty is better than empty," Mr. Sterling said. "Sit." "Show him." The room was tense. Everyone was watching. It felt like the climax of a movie, but Lisa was living it. Her hands were sweating. She felt sick to her stomach. But she also felt a strange spark lighting up inside her. The shame that Julian had poured on her was mixing with something else: defiance. She looked at Julian, who was sneering at her, waiting for her to fail so he could laugh. Then she looked at Mr. Sterling, who was looking at her with total belief. Lisa took a deep breath. She walked over to the bench. She sat down. The leather was cool. She reached up and adjusted the height of the bench, a habit from 1,000 years ago. She placed her hands on her lap. She looked at the keys. They were terrifying. "Just one song," Mr. Sterling said gently from behind her. Lisa closed her eyes for a second. She blocked out the lights. She blocked out the guests. She blocked out Julian. She imagined she was back in her small apartment, playing on an old keyboard with headphones on. She imagined the sound, the feel of the music. She opened her eyes. She placed her fingers on the keys. Then, she stopped. She hesitated. "I can't play if he's watching me like that," Lisa said, her voice suddenly stronger, cutting through the silence. She turned her head slightly to look at Julian. He's waiting for me to mess up. Julian opened his mouth to speak, but Mr. Sterling spoke first. Then perhaps he should leave, Mr. Sterling said loudly. Or perhaps he should learn some humility. The silence in the room stretched, tight as a wire. Lisa waited. Her fingers hovered over the keys. This was the moment. She could get up and run, or she could play. She took a breath, closed her eyes again to find the silence inside herself, and let her fingers fall. The first note wasn't loud. It was soft, clear, and sharp, like a pin dropping on glass. It cut through the thick air of the ballroom instantly. The murmuring of the crowd didn't stop all at once, it faded away layer by layer as people realized that the sound wasn't a recording, wasn't background noise, but was coming from the fingers of the girl in the black uniform. Lisa didn't hear the silence. She had her eyes closed, shutting out the golden lights, the chandeliers, and the hundreds of staring eyes. She was trying to shut out the fear, too. For a second, her fingers felt stiff and foreign, like they belonged to someone else, but as the second note followed the first, and then a third, a memory clicked into place. Her hands remembered what her mind was terrified to recall. It was like riding a bike, her muscles knew the path even when she was lost. She was playing a piece she hadn't touched in years, a complex and haunting melody by Chopin. It started slowly, a river of notes that flowed upstream. Her right hand began to dance across the ivory keys, finding the rhythm she had kept locked inside her heart for so long. Julian, standing a few feet away with his glass of whiskey, let out a loud, annoyed huff. He checked his watch, making a show of being bored. "Okay, that's enough," he muttered, turning to the man next to him. "She's blinking at it. Let's get the auction started." But the man next to him didn't answer. He was staring at Lisa, his mouth slightly open. Julian frowned and looked around. No one was moving. No one was drinking. No one was laughing. The entire room was frozen. The band in the corner had stopped packing up their instruments. The servers had stopped walking. Everyone was facing the piano. Lisa felt the change in the air, but she didn't let it stop her. The music was taking her over now. The stiffness in her shoulders melted away, replaced by a soaring feeling of freedom. She was no longer a waitress. She was no longer a poor girl with debts she couldn't pay. She was a musician. This was her language, the only way she could truly speak. The song grew louder. The melody shifted from sad and gentle to something powerful and stormy. Her left hand began to press down harder, creating a deep, rumbling bass that vibrated through the floor and up the legs of the listeners. The sound was massive, filling the huge vaulted ceiling of the ballroom. It was a sound that machines couldn't make, a sound that money couldn't buy. It was filled with raw emotion, years of tiredness, years of hiding, years of feeling small. It all came pouring out of her fingers and into the strings of the piano. Julian turned back to look at her, his face twisting in confusion. He expected her to fail. He expected to hear a clumsy mistake, a wrong note that would prove he was right to mock her. But the mistake never came. The music was flawless. It was technically perfect, but it was more than that. It was alive. He watched her hands, amazed at the speed and precision of her movement. He looked at her face. She wasn't looking at the keys, she was looking up, her face peaceful, lost in the sound. He felt a strange sensation in his chest, a tight, uncomfortable feeling. It was jealousy. Pure, bitter jealousy. He had spent millions of dollars to be the center of attention, to be the most important person in the room. But in 5 minutes, this girl with the cheap shoes had taken all of that power away from him without saying a single word. She had something he could never buy. Mr. Sterling stood still, his cane resting on the floor. He wasn't smiling anymore, he was listening with the intensity of a surgeon watching a heartbeat. He recognized the talent. It wasn't just skill, it was a gift. A rare, raw gift that the world often crushed under the weight of survival. He felt a deep sense of relief that he had stopped her from leaving. The world needed to hear this. The song reached its climax. The music swelled, crashing over the audience like a wave. Lisa's body swayed with the rhythm, her fingers flying across the keys, a blur of motion. The sound was breathtakingly beautiful, a mix of pain and hope that resonated with every person in the room. Even the people who didn't know anything about classical music could feel the emotion radiating off the stage. They stopped seeing a waitress. They saw an artist. Then came the final chord. Lisa struck the keys with force, holding them down as the sound rang out, echoing into the high rafters. She lifted her hands off the keys, but the sound seemed to hang in the air, refusing to die. Silence followed. It wasn't just the polite silence of an audience waiting for the song to end so they could clap. It was a heavy, stunned silence. The kind of silence that happens when something magical has just occurred and people are afraid that if they make a sound, the spell will break. Lisa sat there, her chest heaving, her hands trembling in her lap. Slowly, the reality of where she was came back to her. The spell faded. She opened her eyes and saw the hundreds of people staring at her. The fear came rushing back. She had done it. She had played. And now, she was probably going to be fired. She slid off the bench quickly, smoothing down her skirt. She grabbed her tray from the floor, trying to make herself small again. She needed to leave. She needed to hide. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the room at large. "I have to go." She turned to flee, heading toward the service door. "Don't you dare move," a voice rang out. It wasn't Julian. It was Mr. Sterling. He was stepping onto the platform, his voice strong and commanding. He walked over to Lisa and gently placed a hand on her shoulder, stopping her. "You have nothing to apologize for," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "That was the most beautiful thing I have heard in the city in 20 years. The silence broke. A clap started near the front. It was slow at first, then louder. Then another person joined. Then another. Within seconds, the entire room erupted into applause. It wasn't the polite clapping from before. It was thunderous. People were cheering. Some were standing up. Julian was standing in the back, his face red, clapping his hands slowly but looking like he had swallowed a lemon. Lisa stood there, stunned, tears finally spilling over her cheeks. She looked at Mr. Sterling. "I don't understand," she said. "You belong here," Mr. Sterling said firmly. "Not serving the drinks. Playing the music." He turned to the crowd, raising his hand to quiet them down. "This isn't just a waitress," he announced. "This is a prodigy you almost chased out of the room because of her uniform." He looked over at Julian. "And as for the auction, Julian, I will buy this piano right now for double the asking price. On one condition." The room waited. Julian looked up, his ears perking up at the mention of double the price. "And what is that?" Julian asked, his voice tight. "It is not for you to keep," Mr. Sterling said, looking at Lisa. "It is for her to play. Whenever she wants." The room went silent again, waiting for Julian's reaction. He looked at the old man, then at the piano, then at Lisa. He was trapped. He couldn't say no to Mr. Sterling, a legend in the industry, without looking like a fool. He swallowed his pride, forcing a grimace that looked like a smile. "Of course," Julian said through gritted teeth. "Whatever, makes sense." Mr. Sterling turned back to Lisa. "What do you say, my dear, will you play for us again?" Lisa looked at her hands. Then she looked at the piano, gleaming under the lights. For the first time in her life, the heavy weight of her financial problems, the tiredness and the fear, seemed to lift just a little bit. She realized that her music was not gone. It had just been hiding, waiting for the right moment to come out. She wiped her eyes, took a deep breath, and a small, genuine smile appeared on her face. It wasn't a smile for the guests. It was a smile for herself. "Yes," Lisa said. "I will play."